Hello again, and welcome to the second presentation. Knowing the three assessment objectives, or AOs as they're called, is really important because they're the skills examiners mark, and so your final grade depends on how well you articulate these skills. Though the AOs are common to all of the examination boards, they differ in their weightings, i.e. their importance in the mark scheme. And this will be explained in the next presentation. But let's first have a look at the AOs in the context of examination requirements. All the AOs must address 4 precepts or rules that drive your thinking when revising and responding to examination questions. I'll be making sure of that when I mark the assignments you email to nari@sociologyvideoscribe.com. The 4 precepts are sociological theories like Marxism and functionalism, concepts such as power, control and patriarchy, evidence drawn from contemporary events, news stories, past research, and finally research methods. AO1 requires you to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of these 4 precepts. Knowledge is not the same as understanding, and as the Greek philosopher Thucydides said, knowledge without understanding is useless. As a matter of fact, understanding key ideas makes memorizing them so much easier. And as knowledge is the foundational objective, it's very important you practice your memory skills. In fact, as most people understand and remember on the basis of what they see and hear, as do witnesses in court, I hope my audio-visual method works for you. Understanding is the I get it moment, and is the more astute twin of knowledge. For example, knowledge tells us that a tomato is a fruit. It's actually a berry. But we understand through experience that eating it with ice cream is unpleasant. Archimedes, observing the rise in water level as he entered his bath, shouted, "Eureka!" For at that moment he understood and knew his theory was correct. Understanding not only consolidates your memory, but also develops your ability to select and explain the most relevant theories, concepts, evidence, and research methods raised by the examination questions. AO2 requires you to apply the 4 precepts to a range of issues in contemporary society. It shows the examiner you understand because you're applying the precepts to society in a selective and considered manner that's relevant to the examination question. So, for example, in this ongoing corona pandemic, some refused to follow the curfew rules, and one particular government advisor broke the rule. What effect does this have on society? Does this deviant act challenge community spirit, or as we sociologists call it, social solidarity? Do people in power feel privileged and above the law because they're part of the ruling class? Does the mere act of clapping hands and applauding health workers actually help them? Or is this just a show? These are examples of questions that show you are aware, and when the examination comes, you'll be in a position to fully elaborate and answer issues sociologically. The teacher in me is tempted to do this now, but these are presentations and not lessons. AO2 is all about interpretation and implementation of sociology to the real world, and it demands your finger on the pulse of society. Now, to keep your finger on the pulse of society requires you to read sociological journals, trusted newspapers, and accurate online and TV news. Our online discussions will involve debating contemporary issues, so please, pretty please with cherry on top, be up to date with the issues of the day so we can interpret and implement theories and concepts and provide the necessary evidence examination questions require. AO3 requires you to analyse and then evaluate. Analysis is all about how elements relate to each other. It's a bit like putting a jigsaw puzzle together and taking it apart. And the consequences and effects of these elements on the issues raised by the examination questions. Words associated with analysis include because, so, if, then, since, due to, and as a result. Let's take the Marxist theory on education as an example of analysis and its impact on our understanding of society. As a theory, the core of the Marxist argument, rightly or wrongly, states education is an ideological state apparatus of ruling class control, and they argue that the line between education and indoctrination is blurred. Because education is an ideological tool. To analyse this perspective, we need to deconstruct and relate seminal concepts to the requirements of an examination question. For example, evaluate the Marxist view that education reproduces class inequalities. A favourite question. The basic minimum concepts will have to include the reproduction of class inequality. Now, your revision will show that it's through cultural, material factors and the processes within school. The legitimation of social class inequality. For example, examination results and higher education statistics show a distinct class difference. The preparation of a docile workforce. For example, are schools similar to prisons? You may think this odd, but when you actually think about that they both share an authoritarian structure, they have a dress code, emphasis is on silence and order, there's negative reinforcement, students walk in lines, there's a loss of individual autonomy, no input in decision making, and set times enforced for walking, eating and talking. So, what evidence substantiates the Marxist argument? Well, we have, amongst others, the correspondence principle by Bowles and Gintis in their book, Schooling in a Capitalist America, written in 1976. There's Learning to Labour by Paul Willis, 1977. And there's Deschooling Society by Ivan Ilyich, 1971. How do the research methods fit with the theory? For example, Paul Willis in Learning to Labour used participant observation to explain how working class kids get working class jobs. He may not have reached the same conclusions if he had used non-participant observation because he wanted to find out how the lads felt and interacted with teachers and the school system. All the steps taken in AO1, knowledge and understanding, AO2, application, and the first part of AO3, analysis, eventually lead to the last component of AO3, that is, evaluation. In your evaluation, the examiner wants you to appreciate the bigger picture and objectively judge the strengths and weaknesses of theories, concepts, evidence, and research methods. A good evaluation asks critical questions. For example, is Marxist theory ideological and biased? What about the positive benefits of education? Why do Marxists reduce analysis to social class and the economy when gender, ethnicity, religion, and social policy play a significant role? The evaluation is an objective judgment and it must not be based on your opinion. Critical questions in evaluating include, says who? Is it so? Why is it so? Why should they say that? What do others say? What's that number based on? What's the evidence? For practice, try these questions on your family and friends and make yourself really, really popular. But seriously, your ability to communicate the evaluation will be judged on the way you present arguments, make judgments, and draw conclusions in terms of those 4 important precepts. In order to conclude, restate the issues raised by the examination question. Summarize the key points. And finally, state the various arguments representing the different schools of thought. At A level, this is usually restricted to 2. So in summary, your ability to memorize and recall, select and explain, interpret and implement, distinguish and relate, and finally, judge and conclude are skills you must develop to succeed. Please make sure you revisit this presentation regularly to remain focused in your response to examination questions I'll be putting your way. Let's now have a look at the similarities and differences of the examination boards in their weightings of the assessment objectives, as well as the topics they include.